The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle. Inside the royal residence, a small corgi mix named Muck padded quietly through the corridors that had once echoed with his beloved owner's footsteps. The dog's brown eyes held a sadness that even the most attentive staff members couldn't quite ease. He had been Queen Elizabeth II's faithful companion during her final years, and now, months after her passing, the little dog seemed lost in the grandeur of the palace he once called home. Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson had taken Muck in after the Queen's death, along with another corgi named Sandy. They did their best to care for the dogs, understanding the deep bond the Queen had shared with her corgis throughout her remarkable life. But as weeks turned into months, it became clear that Muck needed something different. He needed the energy and playfulness that only a young person could provide. The dog had grown listless, spending hours lying by windows, as if waiting for someone who would never return. Sarah Ferguson noticed it first during one of her morning walks with Muck through the grounds. The dog barely showed interest in the squirrels or the other animals that usually caught his attention. His tail, which should have wagged with excitement, remained still. She spoke with Prince Andrew about her concerns, and together they realized that Muck needed more than just care and affection. He needed purpose, activity, and perhaps most importantly, he needed to feel like he belonged somewhere again. The discussion about Muck's future reached the ears of Queen Camilla during a family gathering at Clarence House. Camilla, who had always admired her late mother-in-law's devotion to her corgis, listened thoughtfully as the situation was explained. She knew how much the Queen had loved these dogs, treating them not just as pets but as family members. The thought of one of them being unhappy tugged at her heart. As the conversation continued, an idea began to form in Camilla's mind, one that seemed almost perfect in its simplicity. Camilla's grandson, Freddie Parker Bowles, had recently turned 12 years old. He was an energetic, kind-hearted boy who loved animals and spent much of his free time outdoors. His parents, Tom Parker Bowles and his wife, had mentioned several times how Freddie had been asking for a dog of his own. They lived in a comfortable home in the countryside with plenty of space for a pet to run and play. Freddie was responsible for his age, helping care for the family's chickens and even a rescued rabbit they had taken in the previous year. The more Camilla thought about it, the more sense it made. Freddie would give Muck the active, playful environment he desperately needed. The boy's youthful energy could bring life back to the grieving dog. At the same time, having one of the late Queen's beloved corgis would teach Freddie about responsibility, heritage, and the importance of caring for those who have lost someone dear to them. It was a connection between generations, a living link to the great Queen who had served the nation for 7 decades. Camilla approached her son Tom with the idea during a quiet afternoon tea. She explained the situation carefully, emphasizing that this wasn't just about giving Freddie a pet. This was about giving Muck a second chance at happiness and teaching her grandson about the weight of responsibility that came with caring for something precious. Tom listened intently, understanding the significance of what his mother was proposing. He knew his son would be thrilled, but he also wanted to make sure Freddie understood the importance of what he would be taking on. After discussing it with his wife, Tom agreed to the arrangement. However, before they told Freddie, they wanted to make sure the transition would be smooth. They visited Windsor to meet with Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, bringing Freddie along under the pretense of a simple family visit. As they sat in the drawing room, Muck was brought in. The moment the dog entered, Freddie's eyes lit up. He immediately knelt down, extending his hand slowly and speaking in soft, gentle tones. To everyone's surprise, Muck approached without hesitation, his tail giving a small wag for the first time in weeks. The connection was immediate and undeniable. Freddie stroked Muck's soft fur, talking to him about the garden at home and all the adventures they could have together. The dog leaned into the boy's touch, and for a moment everyone in the room felt a sense of rightness about what was about to happen. Sarah Ferguson wiped a tear from her eye, knowing that the Queen would have approved. She would have wanted her beloved companion to be happy, to be loved, and to bring joy to another generation of the family. Prince Andrew gave his blessing, though not without emotion. He had grown fond of Muck during their time together, and would miss the little dog's presence. But he recognized that this was what was best for Muck. The arrangements were made for the dog to move to Tom Parker Bowles's home within the week. The staff at Windsor began preparing Mook's belongings, his favorite toys, blankets, and the special collar the Queen had given him. Each item carried memories, but they would also help Mook settle into his new home. The news of the transfer was kept quiet within the family at first. They wanted Freddie to have time to bond with Mook before the arrangement became more widely known. Tom and his wife sat Freddie down and explained the significance of what was happening. They told him about the Queen's love for her corgis, about how Mook had been by her side during difficult times, and about the responsibility that came with caring for such a special dog. Freddie listened with wide eyes, the weight of the honor slowly sinking in. He promised to take the best care of Mook, to make sure the dog felt loved and happy every single day. The day Mook arrived at his new home started like any other spring morning in the English countryside. The birds sang in the garden, and a light breeze rustled through the trees surrounding the Parker Bowles property. Freddie had barely slept the night before, too excited about the arrival of his new companion. He had spent the previous afternoon preparing a special area in his room with a comfortable bed, water bowls, and some toys he had carefully selected from the local pet shop. When the car pulled into the driveway, Freddie rushed to the window, his heart pounding with anticipation. Sarah Ferguson had personally accompanied Mook on the journey, wanting to ensure the transition went smoothly. She stepped out of the vehicle carrying the small dog in her arms, and Freddie could see Mook's ears perked up, alert and curious about his new surroundings. The boy waited patiently by the door as his parents had instructed, not wanting to overwhelm the corgi on his first moments in the new home. Sarah walked slowly up the path, speaking softly to Mook as they approached. Tom and his wife greeted them at the entrance, and then Freddie was allowed to come forward. He knelt down again just as he had done at Windsor, and spoke in the same gentle voice. Mook's nose twitched as he took in all the new scents, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar environment. For a moment there was uncertainty in the dog's expression, a natural response to being in a completely different place. But then Freddie produced a small treat from his pocket, offering it with an open palm, and Mook took a tentative step forward. The adults watched as boy and dog began their first real interaction in what would be Mook's new home. Sarah provided detailed instructions about the dog's routine, his favorite foods, the times he liked to walk, and the little quirks that made Mook unique. She explained that he preferred sleeping in a quiet corner, that he sometimes whimpered softly in his sleep, probably dreaming of times past, and that he absolutely loved having his ears scratched in a particular way. Freddie absorbed every word, nodding seriously as he committed each detail to memory. After Sarah departed, wiping away tears as she said goodbye to Mook one last time, the real work of settling in began. Tom and his wife decided to give Freddie the responsibility of showing Mook around the house and garden, with supervision, of course. The boy led the corgi through each room, speaking constantly in that soothing voice explaining what each space was for. Mook followed cautiously at first, his claws clicking on the hardwood floors, his nose investigating every corner and piece of furniture. The garden proved to be the turning point. When Freddie opened the back door, Mook's entire demeanor changed. The enclosed space was filled with flowering plants, a small vegetable patch, and a lawn perfect for running. The boy threw a soft ball across the grass, and after a moment's hesitation, Mook trotted after it. He didn't bring it back, but he sniffed it with interest, his tail beginning to wag with more enthusiasm than it had in months. Freddie laughed with delight, and the sound seemed to encourage the dog further. Over the next few days, a routine began to establish itself. Freddie would wake early to take Mook for a morning walk around the property. The boy had researched corgi care extensively, learning about the breed's needs and characteristics. He discovered that corgis were originally bred as herding dogs, which explained Mook's tendency to try to herd the family's chickens during their garden time. This became a source of great amusement for everyone, watching the dignified former royal pet attempting to organize a flock of confused hens. Freddie's dedication to Mook's care impressed his parents greatly. The boy kept a journal documenting the dog's daily activities, his eating habits, and his moods. He wanted to track Mook's adjustment and make sure he could report back to the family about how well the corgi was settling in. Every evening, Freddie would sit on the floor of his room with Mook beside him, gently brushing the dog's coat while telling him stories about his day at school or sharing his thoughts about various topics. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Mook began waiting by the door every afternoon for Freddie to return from school, his tail wagging vigorously when he heard the familiar footsteps approaching. At night, the dog would sleep in the special bed Freddie had prepared, though more often than not the boy would wake to find Mook had quietly moved to sleep beside his own bed, as if wanting to be close to his new young companion. Word of the arrangement had remained within the immediate family, but it couldn't stay secret forever. Tom Parker Bowles had to inform his staff and close friends about the new addition to the household, if only to explain why a dog with such distinctive markings and bearing was now a permanent resident. Most people reacted with warmth and understanding, recognizing the appropriateness of the Queen's pet finding a home with another member of the extended royal family. However, not everyone within the royal household had been informed of the transfer. The ceremonial guards at the various royal residences, while aware that the Queen's corgis had been rehomed after her death, didn't know the specific details of where each dog had gone. These guards, who had served during the Queen's reign and had often seen her walking with her beloved pets, held a special reverence for anything connected to the late monarch. The corgis weren't just dogs to them, they were living symbols of the Queen's presence and personality. This gap in communication would soon lead to an unexpected situation. Queen Camilla had decided that Freddie should bring Mook to a small informal family gathering at one of the royal residences. She felt it was important for the dog to maintain some connection to his former home, and for the family to see how well he had adapted to his new life. The gathering was meant to be private and low-key, just immediate family members sharing a Sunday afternoon together. Freddie was nervous about bringing Mook back to a royal residence. He worried the dog might become sad or confused, remembering his previous life with the Queen. Tom reassured his son that it would be good for Mook to visit, that it would help him understand that while his life had changed, he was still part of the same extended family. They prepared carefully for the visit, packing Mook's favorite toys and treats, and making sure the dog was well groomed and comfortable. The residence chosen for the gathering was one of the smaller royal properties, a place where the family could meet without the formality and scrutiny that came with the larger palaces. It had a beautiful garden and a relaxed atmosphere that seemed perfect for a casual family afternoon. Tom drove with Freddie and Mook, the dog sitting calmly in the back seat watching the countryside pass by the window. As they approached the gates, Freddie felt his stomach flutter with a mixture of excitement and anxiety about what the day would bring. The car approached the gates of the royal residence just after 2 in the afternoon. The sun was high in a cloudless sky, and the grounds looked immaculate as always, with every hedge trimmed to perfection and every flower bed arranged with precision. 2 ceremonial guards stood at attention near the entrance, their red uniforms crisp and their expressions neutral as they performed their duty. These were men who took their roles seriously, who had trained for years to serve the royal family with dignity and respect. As Tom's car slowed at the security checkpoint, one of the guards stepped forward to verify their arrival. He checked the list of expected visitors, noting Tom Parker Bowles and his son's names. Everything was in order, and he waved them through with a professional nod. The guard returned to his position, expecting nothing unusual about the visit. It was common for family members to come and go from the residence, especially for informal gatherings. Tom parked in the designated area near the side entrance, a less formal entry point typically used by family members rather than official guests. Freddie opened his door carefully, then reached back to help Mook out of the vehicle. The corgi jumped down onto the gravel drive, his nose immediately going to work, sniffing the familiar scents of a royal property. His ears were perked forward, and his expression showed recognition. This wasn't his exact former home, but the atmosphere, the smells, the very feel of the place was similar to where he had spent so much of his life with the Queen. As they walked toward the entrance, Mook's distinctive gait caught the attention of one of the guards who had moved to a position near the pathway. Corporal James Mitchell had served the royal family for 15 years, and during that time he had seen the Queen countless times walking her corgis. He knew the look of those dogs, the particular way they moved, the proud bearing they carried despite their small size. His eyes widened slightly as he watched the dog approaching with the young boy and his father. Corporal Mitchell nudged his fellow guard, Sergeant David Hughes, who had served even longer in the ceremonial guard. Hughes turned his gaze toward the approaching trio, and his reaction was immediate. His carefully maintained neutral expression cracked for just a moment, replaced by pure astonishment. Both guards recognized Muke instantly. They had seen this exact dog walking beside the Queen during her final years. The distinctive markings, the way he carried himself, everything about him was unmistakable. The two guards exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Neither could quite believe what they were seeing. One of the Queen's personal corgis, a dog that had been as much a part of the royal household as the furniture itself, was being walked by a young boy they didn't immediately recognize. Their training kept them from speaking out of turn or abandoning their posts, but their minds raced with questions. How had this come to be? Why was the dog here? Was this some kind of official arrangement they hadn't been informed about? Freddie noticed the guards staring and felt his cheeks grow warm. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially not from people in such impressive uniforms. He instinctively moved closer to his father while keeping a gentle grip on Muke's lead. The dog, however, seemed completely unbothered by the attention. He continued his dignified walk toward the entrance, occasionally pausing to investigate a particularly interesting scent on the path. Tom noticed the guards' reactions as well. He had expected some surprise, perhaps even some questions, but he hadn't anticipated such visible astonishment. He realized that the guards probably hadn't been briefed about Muke's new living arrangements. This was exactly the kind of communication gap that could occur in such a large and complex organization as the royal household. He made a mental note to mention it to someone inside, to ensure that the staff were properly informed to avoid future confusion. As they reached the door, another guard who was stationed at the entrance also noticed Muke. This guard, a younger man named Lance Corporal William Foster, had only joined the ceremonial duties 2 years prior, but even he had learned to recognize the Queen's beloved pets. His eyes went wide and he nearly forgot to open the door for the visitors, catching himself just in time to perform his duty. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle, his mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. Inside the entrance hall, a butler who had served the royal family for decades was waiting to greet them. Unlike the guards outside, he had been properly informed about the situation with Muke. He smiled warmly at Freddie and greeted the dog by name, reaching down to give him a gentle pat. The butler's easy familiarity with Muke helped put Freddie at ease, and the boy's grip on the lead relaxed slightly. Meanwhile, outside, the guards were quietly conferring during a brief moment when they could speak without being overheard. Corporal Mitchell was the first to voice what they were all thinking. He wondered aloud how one of the Queen's dogs had ended up with what appeared to be a civilian family, or at least someone outside the immediate royal circle they were familiar with. Sergeant Hughes suggested that perhaps the dog was only visiting, that maybe the family was caring for him temporarily while some arrangement was being finalized. Lance Corporal Foster had a different theory. He had read somewhere that the Queen's corgis had been distributed among family members after her passing. Perhaps this young boy was connected to the royal family in some way they weren't aware of. The discussion continued in hushed tones, each guard trying to piece together the puzzle with the limited information they had. Their astonishment hadn't faded. It had simply transformed into burning curiosity. Inside the residence, Freddie and Muke were being led through the corridors toward the garden where the family gathering was taking place. The dog's behavior was remarkable. He moved through the halls with the confidence of someone who had walked similar corridors many times before. His tail was up, his pace steady, and he showed no signs of anxiety or confusion. If anything, he seemed to be enjoying the familiar environment even though it wasn't exactly the same as his former home. Queen Camilla was the first to greet them in the garden. She bent down to pat Muke, speaking softly to the dog before turning her attention to Freddie. She asked the boy how things were going, whether Muke was settling in well and how he was managing the responsibility of caring for such a special pet. Freddie answered each question thoughtfully, his initial nervousness fading as he talked about his daily routine with Muke and the bond they had developed. Other family members gathered around, all interested in seeing how Muke was doing and meeting the young boy who had taken on such an important role. Prince Andrew was there, and he spent several minutes observing Muke with Freddie, noting the clear affection between them. He felt a sense of peace seeing how well the arrangement was working. The dog looked healthier and happier than he had in months, and the boy clearly took his responsibility seriously. As the afternoon progressed, Muke explored the garden with Freddie following closely. The dog investigated flower beds, watched birds hopping across the lawn, and even engaged in a brief play session with a ball that Freddie had brought along. The family members watched with smiles, some sharing memories of seeing the Queen in similar settings with her corgis. There was a bittersweet quality to the gathering, a mixture of sadness for what had been lost and happiness for what had been preserved through Mook's new life. Back at the entrance, the guard's shift was changing, but the incoming guards were quickly informed by their colleagues about what they had witnessed. The story of seeing one of the Queen's corgis being walked by a young boy spread rapidly through the guard quarters. By evening, every guard on duty was aware of the situation, and all were curious about the details. The following morning, the guard captain, Major Robert Thornberry, arrived at the residence for his regular briefing. He had been informed by the night staff about the unusual incident and the reaction it had caused among the guards. Major Thornberry was a man who valued order and proper communication, and he was somewhat frustrated that his personnel had been caught off guard by the situation with Fook. He immediately requested a meeting with the senior household staff to understand exactly what had transpired and why his guards hadn't been properly briefed. The household secretary, a efficient woman named Margaret Pennington, who had served the royal family for over 30 years, explained the situation in detail. She acknowledged that there had been a communication oversight. The arrangement with Muke had been handled as a private family matter, and it simply hadn't occurred to anyone that the ceremonial guards needed to be informed. After all, the dog was no longer an official resident of any royal property, so it hadn't seemed necessary to update the guard protocols. However, she now understood that the guard's connection to the Queen and her pets went beyond mere professional duty. Major Thornberry listened carefully, his stern expression softening as he learned about how Muke had struggled after the Queen's death, and how young Freddie Parker Bowles had given the dog a new lease on life. The Major had served under Queen Elizabeth II for most of his career. He remembered seeing her on countless occasions with her corgis, how her face would light up when she was with them, how they seemed to bring her a kind of peace that nothing else could. The thought of one of those dogs being unhappy had troubled him since he first heard the IE story from his guards. He thanked Mrs. Pennington for the explanation and requested permission to brief his guards on the matter properly. She agreed immediately, understanding that this was important not just for operational clarity, but for the emotional well-being of the men and women who had served the Queen with such dedication. Major Thornberry scheduled a special assembly for all guards who had been on duty during the previous day, as well as those who would be serving in the coming weeks. That afternoon, the guards gathered in their briefing room, a space usually reserved for discussions of security protocols and duty assignments. Major Thornberry stood before them, his bearing as impeccable as always, but there was something different in his expression. He began by acknowledging what many of them had witnessed the day before, the arrival of one of the late Queen's corgis with a young boy they hadn't recognized. The Major then told them the complete story. He explained about Meg's depression after the Queen's passing, how the dog had lost his spark and energy. He spoke about the decision to place him with Camilla's grandson, a responsible and caring boy who could provide the active, loving environment the dog needed. He emphasized that this wasn't a casual decision or a dismissal of the dog's importance. Rather, it was an act of love and respect for what the Queen would have wanted, for her beloved pet to be happy and well cared for. The guards listened in absolute silence, many of them visibly moved by the explanation. Corporal Mitchell, who had been one of the first to spot Muke, found himself blinking back tears. He remembered a particular afternoon when he had been on patrol in the gardens at Windsor and had encountered the Queen walking with Muke. She had stopped to chat with him briefly, as she sometimes did with her guards, and Muke had sniffed curiously at his boots. The Queen had laughed and said something about how her dogs were the best judges of character. It was a small moment, but it had meant the world to Mitchell, a reminder that behind all the ceremony and protocol was a kind and genuine person. Sergeant Hughes raised his hand and asked if the boy, Freddie, understood the significance of his responsibility. Major Thornberry smiled for the first time during the briefing. He shared what he had learned about Freddie's dedication, how the boy kept a daily journal about Muke's care, how he had researched corgi needs extensively, and how he treated the dog with the utmost respect and affection. The Major explained that Freddie had been carefully chosen for this role precisely because he understood and respected the heritage he was taking on. Lance. Corporal Foster asked if Muick would be visiting the residence regularly. Major Thornberry explained that there would likely be occasional visits for family gatherings, and when those occurred, the dog should be treated with the same respect as any family member. He added that if any guard wished to greet Muick during such visits, they were welcome to do so, provided it didn't interfere with their duties, and they had permission from Freddie or his father. The briefing continued with Major Thornberry, sharing some lighter details about how well Muick was doing in his new home. He mentioned the dog's attempts to herd chickens, which brought chuckles from the assembled guards. He spoke about how Muick's health had improved, how he had regained the weight he had lost during his period of mourning, and how he now showed enthusiasm for daily walks and playtime. Each detail seemed to lift a weight from the guards' shoulders, as if they had been collectively worried about the dog's welfare without fully realizing it. One of the older guards, a man named Sergeant Peter Walsh, who had served for over 25 years, stood up and shared a memory. He recalled being on duty at Buckingham Palace when he was much younger, and the Queen had walked past with several of her corgis. One of the dogs had gotten loose and had run directly to Walsh, jumping up against his leg in a friendly greeting. The Queen had apologized profusely, but Walsh remembered feeling honored that one of her dogs had chosen to interact with him. He said that knowing Muick was now happy and cared for felt like honoring the Queen's memory in a meaningful way. His words resonated with many in the room. Several other guards shared their own memories of seeing the Queen with her corgis, of the obvious joy those animals brought her, and of how the dogs had seemed like an essential part of who she was. The briefing transformed into something more than just a dissemination of information. It became a moment of collective remembrance and healing, a chance for these dedicated servants to process their grief over losing the Queen and to find comfort in knowing that part of her legacy lived on in the happy life of a beloved pet. Major Thornberry concluded the briefing by emphasizing that this story, the story of Muick finding a new home with Freddie, was a private family matter. While he had shared it with them so they would understand and not be caught off guard in the future, it was not something to be discussed outside their ranks. The guards nodded in understanding. They had no desire to gossip or spread the story. They simply felt privileged to know it and to understand the care that had been taken to ensure one of the Queen's companions was happy and loved. As the guards filed out of the briefing room, there was a noticeable change in their demeanor. The confusion and concern from the previous day had been replaced with a sense of peace and even pride. They felt connected to something important, to the continuation of the Queen's legacy in an unexpected but beautiful way. Several guards made a point of seeking out Corporal Mitchell and Sergeant Hughes, thanking them for bringing the matter to Major Thornberry's attention and ensuring they all learned the truth. That evening, in the guard quarters, the conversation naturally turned to Muick and Freddie. The guards discussed what they had learned, sharing their relief that the dog was being so well cared for. Some speculated about what the Queen would think of the arrangement, and the consensus was that she would be pleased. She had always been practical and forward-thinking, and she had loved children. The idea of her beloved pet bringing joy to a young boy while receiving excellent care would have appealed to her sensibilities. The next time Freddie visited the residence with Muick, which happened a few weeks later for another family gathering, the guards were prepared. As Tom's car approached, Corporal Mitchell was again on duty. This time, instead of astonishment, his face broke into a warm smile when he saw Muick exit the vehicle. He gave a respectful nod to Freddie, who was surprised but pleased by the friendly greeting. The young boy stood a little taller, feeling the acknowledgement of his important role. Summer arrived with its long golden days, and Muick's transformation became even more apparent. The dog, who had once been listless and withdrawn, now bounded through the Parker Bowles garden with puppy-like enthusiasm. Freddie had established a consistent routine that gave Muick both structure and adventure. Every morning before school, they would take a walk through the nearby countryside lanes. Freddie would talk to Muick about everything from his homework to his dreams for the future, and the dog would listen with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand far more than anyone expected. Tom Parker Bowles watched the relationship develop with growing admiration for his son. Freddie had proven himself to be extraordinarily mature and responsible. The boy never complained about waking early for Muke's walks, even on rainy days when he would have preferred to stay in bed. He never shirked the less pleasant aspects of pet ownership, from cleaning up accidents to dealing with muddy paw prints on the floor. More importantly, Freddie had developed a genuine emotional bond with Muke that went beyond simple pet ownership. One afternoon, Tom found his son sitting in the garden with a book open in his lap, reading aloud to Muke, who lay contentedly beside him. The scene struck Tom as both sweet and significant. Freddie was reading from a biography of Queen Elizabeth II, sharing stories about the monarch's life with the dog who had known her personally. It was Freddie's way of connecting Muke to his past while making him feel secure in his present. The boy somehow understood that the dog's history was important and should be honored, not forgotten. Camilla visited her grandson and Muke several times over those months. During one visit, she brought along a photographer from the family's private collection. She wanted to document Muke's new life, to show other family members and perhaps eventually the public how well the arrangement was working. Freddie was initially self-conscious about being photographed, but the photographer had a gift for making people feel at ease. The resulting images captured genuine moments of joy. A boy and his dog playing fetch, walking together through flower-filled meadows, and resting side by side in the shade of an old oak tree. As careful as the family had been to keep the arrangement private, word inevitably began to spread beyond the immediate royal circle. A newspaper reporter who had contacts within the royal household got wind of the story and began making inquiries. The royal press office, after consulting with the family, decided that a carefully controlled release of information would be better than allowing speculation and rumors to spread unchecked. The official statement was brief and tasteful. It explained that Muke, one of the late Queen's beloved corgis, had been placed in the care of the Queen Consort's grandson, Freddie Parker Bowles, where he was thriving in an active, loving home environment. The statement emphasized that this arrangement honored the Queen's memory by ensuring her pets were happy and well cared for by family members who understood their significance. The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. People who had followed the Queen's life and mourned her passing found comfort in knowing that her pets were being cherished. Social media filled with supportive messages, with many people praising the family for making such a thoughtful decision. Some shared their own stories of helping pets through the grief of losing an owner, creating a broader conversation about animal welfare and the emotional lives of pets. However, not all reaction was positive. A small but vocal group of critics questioned whether a child was the appropriate guardian for such an important animal. Some suggested that Muke should have remained in a royal residence with professional handlers. Others worried that the dog was being used for publicity purposes. These criticisms, though in the minority, stung Freddie when he became aware of them. Tom found his son reading comments online one evening, tears streaming down his face as he read someone suggesting he wasn't capable of properly caring for Mick. Tom immediately sat down with Freddie and had a serious conversation about public opinion and responsibility. He explained that there would always be people who criticized, regardless of how well something was done. What mattered wasn't what strangers on the internet thought, but what Freddie knew to be true in his heart. Tom asked his son if he believed he was doing a good job caring for Mick. Freddie, after thinking carefully, said yes. He knew Muke was happy, healthy, and loved. That was what truly mattered. To address some of the public concerns, Queen Camilla's office released some of the photographs taken during her visit, along with more detailed information about Freddie's care routine. They included comments from the veterinarian who had been seeing Muke, confirming that the dog was in excellent health and showed no signs of stress or neglect. They even included a statement from Sarah Ferguson, who had stayed in touch with the family and visited Mick regularly, attesting to the wonderful care the dog was receiving. The additional information shifted public opinion decisively in favor of the arrangement. Major newspapers ran heartwarming stories about Freddie and Muke, portraying it as a touching example of intergenerational responsibility and care. Some publications reached out requesting interviews, but the family politely declined most of them. They agreed to one carefully arranged interview with a respected journalist who specialized in royal family coverage, hoping that a single comprehensive article would satisfy public curiosity and allow them to return to privacy. The interview took place at the Parker Bowles home on a beautiful September afternoon. The journalist, a woman named Eleanor Hartley, who had covered the royal family for 20 years, arrived expecting a standard publicity piece. What she found instead was a genuinely moving story of connection, responsibility, and love. She watched as Freddie interacted with Muke with a mixture of playfulness and respect. She observed the dog's obvious contentment and the boy's careful attention to his needs. During the interview, Freddie spoke thoughtfully about what it meant to care for Muke. He talked about feeling the weight of responsibility, knowing that he was caring for something precious that had belonged to the Queen. He mentioned that sometimes when he was walking Muke, he would think about all the walks the Queen must have taken with him, and he felt like he was continuing something important. Eleanor found herself moved by the boy's sincerity and maturity. Tom contributed his perspective as well, discussing how proud he was of his son and how the experience had taught Freddie valuable lessons about commitment, compassion, and the importance of honoring the past while living in the present. He spoke about his mother's role in arranging the placement and how she had been proven right in believing that Freddie and Muick would be perfect for each other. The resulting article, published a few weeks later, struck exactly the right tone. It was respectful, warm, and informative without being intrusive or overly sentimental. Eleanor Hartley's writing captured the essence of what made the story special, the way it represented both honoring tradition and adapting to new circumstances. The article included several of the beautiful photographs of Freddie and Muick together, and it quickly became one of the most read pieces about the royal family that year. Following the publication, the story gradually faded from immediate public attention, though it remained a popular feel-good tale that people would occasionally reference. For Freddie and Muick, life returned to its comfortable routine. The boy was relieved to no longer be the subject of public scrutiny, and he could focus on what mattered most to him, giving Muick the best life possible and continuing to strengthen their bond. The guards at the royal residences followed the story in the news with particular interest. They felt a sense of vindication in their initial instinct that something special was happening. When they saw the photographs of Freddie and Muick together, many of them felt the same emotion they had experienced during Major Thornberry's briefing, a sense that the Queen's legacy was being honored in a beautiful and meaningful way. Some of the guards even kept copies of the article, a tangible reminder of their connection to this unexpected but wonderful story. A year had passed since Muick first came to live with Freddie Parker Bowles. The transformation in both boy and dog was remarkable. Muick had grown from a grieving, withdrawn animal into a confident, joyful companion who radiated contentment. His coat gleamed with health, his eyes sparkled with alertness, and his signature corgi energy had returned in full force. He had become a beloved figure in the local community, with neighbors and shopkeepers recognizing him during walks and always stopping to greet him warmly. Freddie had changed too. The responsibility of caring for Muick had matured him in ways his parents hadn't fully anticipated. He had become more organized, more empathetic, and more confident in his own abilities. The experience of taking on such an important role and succeeding at it had given him a sense of purpose and accomplishment that influenced other areas of his life. His teachers noticed improved focus in school, and his friends remarked on how he had become more reliable and thoughtful. The relationship between the boy and the dog had evolved into something profound. They had developed their own language of looks and gestures, understanding each other with minimal need for words. Muick knew when Freddie was having a difficult day and would stay especially close, offering comfort through his presence. Freddie could read Muick's moods and needs with uncanny accuracy, anticipating when the dog wanted to play, when he needed rest, or when something was bothering him. On the anniversary of Muick joining the household, the family held a small celebration. Tom and his wife had prepared a special dinner, and Camilla had come to visit, bringing along a gift for both Freddie and Muick. For the dog, she brought a beautiful new collar with a small engraved tag that read simply, Muick, with the Parker Bowles family crest on the reverse. For Freddie, she brought a leather-bound journal, much nicer than the simple notebook he had been using to document Muick's care. During the dinner, Camilla spoke about how proud she was of her grandson and how right she had been to trust him with such an important responsibility. She shared that she had recently visited Windsor Castle and had spoken with some of the staff who had cared for the Queen's corgis. They had asked after Muick, and when she showed them recent photographs and told them about his life with Freddie, they had been delighted. One elderly staff member had even cried happy tears, saying that the queen would have been so pleased to know her beloved pet was being loved and cared for by a child. The conversation turned to memories of the queen, and Camilla shared stories that Freddie had never heard before. She spoke about how her late mother-in-law had possessed a remarkable ability to make everyone feel valued and seen, from world leaders to the youngest members of staff. The corgis had been an extension of that warmth, always present and always bringing an element of joy and normalcy to even the most formal occasions. Muik, lying contentedly at Freddie's feet, seemed to be listening to the stories about his former owner. As autumn arrived again, bringing with it the anniversary of the Queen's passing, the royal family planned a private memorial service. It would be a small, family-only gathering to remember and celebrate her life. After some discussion, it was decided that Freddie should bring Muik to the service. The dog had been such an important part of the Queen's later life, and his presence would be a living tribute to her love of animals and the joy they brought her. The service was held in a chapel that the Queen had particularly loved, a small intimate space with beautiful stained glass windows. As the family gathered, Muik entered with Freddie, walking with his characteristic dignified gait. The dog seemed to sense the solemnity of the occasion, remaining calm and quiet throughout the service. Several family members found comfort in seeing him there, a tangible connection to the woman they had loved and lost. After the service, as people gathered in the garden for refreshments, something remarkable happened. Muik, who had been resting quietly beside Freddie, suddenly stood and walked purposefully to a particular spot in the garden. It was a bench where the Queen had often sat to enjoy the view. The dog sat down in front of the bench, looked up at it for a long moment, and then returned to Freddie's side. Several people witnessed this, and though none could say with certainty what it meant, it felt like the dog's own private goodbye, a final acknowledgement of the person who had meant so much to him. The moment wasn't lost on the ceremonial guards who were on duty that day. Word of it spread through their ranks, becoming part of the growing legend of Muik and his journey from royal companion to beloved family pet. The guards had come to see the dog's story as emblematic of something larger, the way traditions could evolve and adapt while still maintaining their essential meaning and importance. Over the following months, Freddie began to understand more deeply what it meant to be a steward of living history. He started a blog with his parents' permission and supervision, documenting his experiences caring for Muik. He wrote thoughtfully about the responsibility he felt, the joy the dog brought him, and the lessons he had learned about love, loss, and continuity. The blog attracted a modest but devoted following of people who found inspiration in his story. Through the blog, Freddie connected with other young people who were caring for pets with significant histories, children who had inherited family dogs or those who had adopted older animals. He became an advocate for the idea that young people were capable of serious responsibility when given proper support and trust. He spoke at his school about his experience, inspiring some of his classmates to volunteer at local animal shelters. Queen Camilla followed her grandson's growing confidence and advocacy with pride. She had taken a chance when she suggested placing Muik with Freddie, trusting in her grandson's character and capability. That trust had been rewarded beyond anything she might have hoped. The arrangement had benefited everyone involved. Muik had found happiness again. Freddie had discovered purpose and maturity, and the family had found a meaningful way to honor the late Queen's memory. The ceremonial guards continued to watch Freddie's visits with Muik whenever they occurred. Major Thornberry had made it a tradition to ensure that new guards were briefed on the story as part of their orientation. It had become a teaching tool about the importance of understanding context, about looking beyond surface appearances, and about the many different ways that royal traditions could be honored and maintained. The story reminded them that they served not just an institution, but a family with real emotions, challenges, and solutions. 2 years after Muik first arrived at his new home, a photography book was published featuring the Queen's life. The final chapter included images of her with her corgis over the decades, showing the consistent presence of these beloved animals throughout her reign. The very last page featured a recent photograph of Freddie and Muik together in a sun-dappled garden, with a caption explaining how one of the Queen's final companions had found a new life filled with love and adventure. The photograph perfectly captured what the story had come to represent: continuity and change, tradition and adaptation, grief and healing, Endings and new beginnings. Mook sat proudly beside Freddie, both of them looking at the camera with expressions of contentment and confidence. The image became iconic, frequently shared on social media during discussions about the Queen's legacy and the importance of animal welfare. For Freddie, now a teenager, the experience had shaped his aspirations for the future. He talked about wanting to work with animals, perhaps as a veterinarian or in animal conservation. He credited Muke with teaching him about responsibility, commitment, and the profound impact that caring for another living being could have on one's own character and values. The dog who had come to him during a period of transition had given him direction and purpose that would influence the rest of his life. Muke, now several years older, had settled into a peaceful, happy existence. He still enjoyed his daily walks, though they were a bit slower than they once were. He still tried to herd the chickens, though with less energy than before. He still greeted Freddie every day when the boy returned home, his tail wagging with genuine joy. The grief that had once clouded his eyes had long since disappeared, replaced by contentment and security. The story of the late Queen's dog being given to Camilla's grandson, and the astonishment it caused among those who witnessed it, had become more than just an interesting anecdote. It had become a parable about the nature of legacy, about how the things we love can continue to bring joy and meaning even after we're gone. The Queen's love for her corgis hadn't ended with her passing. It had transformed into something new through Muke's relationship with Freddie, touching lives and inspiring people in ways that no one could have predicted. As the sun set on another ordinary day, Freddie sat in the garden with Muke beside him, just as he had done countless times before. He scratched the dog's ears in the special way Sarah Ferguson had taught him years ago, and Muke leaned into the touch with a contented sigh. In that moment, surrounded by the peaceful evening sounds of the countryside, the boy reflected on how a single decision, to give him responsibility for caring for a dog with such a remarkable history, had changed his life in profound and beautiful ways. The Royal Guard's astonishment had been justified. They had witnessed the beginning of something truly special.